Port Adelaide Football Club is a professional Australian rules football club based in Alberton, Port Adelaide, South Australia. The club's senior team plays in the Australian Football League whilst its reserves and development teams compete in the South Australian National Football League. Port Adelaide is the oldest professional football club in South Australia and the fifth oldest club in the AFL. Since the club's first game on May 24, 1870, it has won 36 South Australian League premierships, including 6 in a row. The club also won the Champions of Australia competition on a record 4 occasions. In 1997, the club joined the Australian Football League as the only pre-existing non-Victorian club Euro, and subsequently added the 2004 AFL Premiership to its achievements. Club history 1870 Euro 1876, formation years by the late 1860s Port Adelaide's river traffic was growing significantly, causing Mr. Rann, Mr. Lester and Mr. Ireland to form a sporting club to benefit local wharf workers. The Port Adelaide Football Club was established on May 12, 1870 as part of a joint Australian football and cricket club, with the first training session taking place 2 days later. It played its first match against a team called the Young Australians on May 24, 1870 at inaugural club president John Hart's property in Glanville. Football in South Australia at this stage was yet to be organised by a single body, and as a result there were several sets of rules in use across the state. 1877 Euro 1889, SAFA Foundation, Alberton Oval and Australia's first grand final. In 1877 Port Adelaide joined 7 other clubs to form the South Australian Football Association, the first league of its type in Australia. It competed its first few seasons wearing magenta guernseys and white shorts. In 1878 the club hosted its first game against the recently established Norwood Football Club, with the visitors winning 1-0. A rivalry between these clubs would soon develop into one of the fiercest in Australian sport. In 1880 the club moved to Alberton Oval. In 1881 the club played an interstate team for the first time against Carlton at Adelaide Oval. Later that year the club travelled to Victoria and played its first game outside South Australia against Sale. During the 1882 season Port Adelaide overcame Norwood for the first time after 9 previous attempts, winning by 1 goal at Adelaide Oval. In 1884 Port Adelaide won its first SAFA Premiership, ending Norwood's run of 6 premierships. On May 25, 1885, Port Adelaide played its first 2 games at the MCG against the South Melbourne and Melbourne, losing to the home sides by 10 behinds and 3 goals respectively. In 1887 immense interest led into the Round 8 meeting against Norwood, as the previous 2 matches between the clubs resulted in draws. Norwood won in front of a then record 11,000 spectators at Adelaide Oval. During 1889 the club played against the Richmond at Punt Road, with Port prevailing by a goal. The 1889 SAFA season ended with Port Adelaide and Norwood equal top, leading to the staging of Australia's first grand final. Norwood went on to defeat Port Adelaide by 2 goals. 1890 Euro 1901, first national success and last wooden spoon. In 1890 Port Adelaide won its second SAFA Premiership and would go on to be crowned champions of Australia for the first time after defeating the FA Premiers South Melbourne. During the 1890s Australia was affected by a severe depression and many players were forced to move interstate to find work, translating into poor on-field results. By 1896, the club was in crisis and finished last, causing the club's committee to meet with the aim of revitalising the club. Historian John Devaney suggested that there was a conscious and deliberate cultivation by both the committee and the team's on-field leaders of a revitalised club spirit, whereby playing for Port Adelaide became a genuine source of pride. It had immediate results, and in 1897 Port Adelaide won a 3rd premiership, finishing the season with a record of February 1, 14, with a scoring record 2.5 times its conceded total. This is one of only 4 occurrences since 1877 that the team that finished last won a premiership the following year. Stan Mallin won Port Adelaide's first Magarey medal in 1899. During the 19th century the club had nicknames including the Cockeldivers, the Seaside Men, the Seasiders and the Magentas. In 1900, Port finished bottom in the six-team competition, which it has not done in any senior league since. 1902 Euro 1915, Black and White and the pre-war Invincibles equals. In 1902, Port Adelaide took the field in black and white Guernseys for the first time after it was having trouble finding dyes that would last for its blue and magenta Guernseys. The first year in the new Guernsey would be a controversial year for the club. After finishing the 1902 season on top of the ladder, was disqualified from a game with South Adelaide after disputing the use of an unaccredited umpire. The 1902 SAFA Premiership would subsequently be awarded to North Adelaide after they defeated South Adelaide in the grand final a week later. Port Adelaide offered to play North Adelaide in a Premiership deciding match, but the association refused. The first Premiership after the dispute came the following year when Port Adelaide defeated South Adelaide 6.6 to 5.5 in the 1903 SAFA Challenge Final. A further Premiership came in 1906 when Port defeated North Adelaide 8.12 to 5.9 in the year's Grand Final. During the early stages of the 1907 season, Port Adelaide travelled to Sydney to play a combination of the city's best players. The game was marketed as Port Adelaide vs Sydney, with the Harbour City side taking the honours 8.9 to 5.14. Port Adelaide won the SAFL Premiership in 1910, defeating Sturt 8.12 to 5.11 in the Grand Final. The club would go on to defeat Collingwood for the 1910 Championship of Australia title. During the 1910 post-season, seeking revenge for their loss the year before, Port Adelaide travelled to Western Australia and beat East Fremantle by 12 points. To conclude the trip, Port Adelaide played a combination of some of the WAFL's best players and achieved a remarkable victory, scoring 6.17 to 6.12, with Samson Hosking named best on ground. Along with beating the premiers from South Australia, Victoria and Western Australia in 1910, Port Adelaide also invited North Broken Hill, the premier team of New South Wales, to a game at Adelaide Oval. Port would win this game 14.20 to 5.5. The following two seasons for Port Adelaide would be frustrating, dropping only one game during the 1911 minor round and going undefeated the following year in 1912, only to be knocked out of contention by West Adelaide both times, the second of these encounters in front of a pre-war South Australian record crowd of 28,500. During the 1912 pre-season, Port Adelaide travelled to Tasmania and took on a combination of players from various Tasmanian Football League sides. The game would prove to be very competitive, with Port Adelaide defeating the TFL combination 7.13 to 6.6. During the 1913 pre-season, Port Adelaide travelled back to Western Australia to play East Fremantle again, with the local side winning for a second time 6.6 to 4.12. Despite this inauspicious pre-season, the club would break through in 1913, dropping only two games during the minor round and eventually defeating North Adelaide 7.12 to 5.10 for the SAFL Premiership and Fitzroy 13.16 to 4.7 for the 1913 Championship of Australia. The 1914 Port Adelaide Football Club season is widely regarded as one of the best in Australian rules football history. It won all its pre-season matches, won all 14 SAFL games by an average margin of 49 points in the 1914 SAFL Grand Final, where it held North Adelaide to a single goal for the match 13.15 to 1.8. The club would then meet VFL premiers Carlton on Adelaide Oval, defeating the Victorian club by 34 points to claim a record fourth Championship of Australia. At the end of 1914 season, a combined team from the six other SAFL clubs played Port Adelaide and lost to the subsequently dubbed Invincibles by 58 points. Key players from this team are Harold Oliver, Angelo Congier and Samson Hosking, who all share the unique distinction of playing in three championships of Australia together as well, all taking part in South Australia's first victorious Australian National Football Carnival in 1911. 1919 Euro 1949, two World Wars, the Great Depression and post-war struggles equals. During World War I, the club lost three players Euro: William Boone, Joseph Watson and Albert Kaplan Euro to the war. A scaled-back competition referred to as the Patriotic League was organised during wartime, in which Port Adelaide won the 1916 and 1917 instalments. After World War I, Harold Oliver, arguably the state's best player, was close to retiring from league football, playing only one game in 1919 and 8 in 1920. However, keen supporters of the club, hoping to replicate its pre-war success, raised funds and bought him a motorbike so he could commute from his farm in Bury for the 1921 season. Oliver would captain the club to the 1921 Premiership, winning his fourth in the process. In 1922, after playing only 5 league matches for the season, his football career came to an end due to commitments regarding his farm and disputes regarding game compensation. His contract termination meant he was paid a 76 currency over 100 currency pounds for the season, making him one of the highest paid footballers of the era. Shortly afterwards, most of Port Adelaide's champion players from before the war started to retire and the club's performances declined. As was the case in the 1890s, the depression of the early 1930s hit the club hard, with players moving interstate to secure employment. By the late 1930s, the economy in Port Adelaide's form both recovered, and after 2 narrow grand final losses in 1934 and 1935, the club won premierships in 1936, 1937 and 1939. During 1939, Bob Quinn, in his third year as a player for the club, coached the team to a grand final win over West Torrens. Many Port Adelaide players also enlisted for military service during this time. In 1941, Port Adelaide suffered its first player casualties from war since World War I, with Lloyd Rudd and Jack Wade both killed on the Allies' front in France. 4 more players would be killed through the war: Maxwell Carmichael, George Quinn, Christopher Johnston and Halcombe Brock. Just as had happened in 1914, the league was being hit hard by player losses in World War II. Due to a lack of able men, the league's 8 teams were reduced to 4, with Port Adelaide merging with nearby West Torrens from 1942 to 1944. The joint club would play in all 3 grand finals during this period, winning the 1942 instalment but losing the 1943 and 1944 editions to the Norwood-North Adelaide combination. Normal competition resumed in 1945. After finishing his military service, Hayden Bunton Sr., now a triple Brownlow and Sandover medalist, joined the club for his final season. However, despite this addition, Port Adelaide was unable to regain its pre-war success and played in only 1 grand final for the rest of the 1940s. 1950 Euro 1973, Foes Williams era and Jack Oatey rivalry equals. At the end of the 1949, having missed 2 finals series in a row, the Port Adelaide Football Club had become desperate to improve its on-field performances. The club's committee subsequently sought out a coach that could win the club its next premiership. Eventually a decision was made which would influence the next 50 years of the Port Adelaide Football Club, with Foster Neil Williams, a brilliant rover from West Adelaide, being appointed captain coach of the club. Williams brought to the club a new coaching style based on success at any cost, which was succinctly encapsulated in the legendary club creed he eventually wrote in 1962. During his second season as coach in 1951, Williams led Port to their first official premiership for 9 seasons, defeating North Adelaide by 11 points. At the end of the 1951 season, the VFL Premiers Geelong visited South Australia to play the local Premiers Port Adelaide on Adelaide Oval. Geelong won the match 8.14 to 6.18 in front of 25,000 people. Port Adelaide would make the grand final again in 1953 against local rivals West Torrens in what would be the Eagles' last appearance before merging with Woodville. West Torrens would disappoint Port Adelaide, winning the 1953 Premiership by 7 points. Port Adelaide's run of disappointment from the 1952 and 1953 seasons were proved to be short-lived, with the club subsequently going on to win a national record 6 grand finals in a row from 1954 to 1959. The club had a win-loss draw record of 105-16-1 over the 6-year period. During the 1950s, Port Adelaide and Melbourne, often the premiers of South Australian and Victorian leagues, played exhibition matches at Norwood Oval. The most notable game was the 1955 match with an estimated crowd of 23,000. the game being a thriller going down to the last 15 seconds with Frank Adams kicking a behind and sealing the game 9.11 to 9.10 in favour of Norm Smith's Demons. The following year Melbourne was full of praise for their cross-border challenger, with those in the Demons camp agreeing that Port Adelaide could take their place in the VFL competition and do themselves credit. Jeff Motley took over the captain coaching role at the club in 1959 when Williams left to take a break from the game. That year the club won the Premiership, setting a national record of 6th consecutive grand final victories. Port Adelaide's hope of winning 7 consecutive premierships was brought to an end in the 1960 preliminary final when Norwood won by 27 points. For the following 2 seasons Port Adelaide would finish third. Fos Williams returned in 1962 and Port Adelaide won 3 of the next 4 premierships, taking his personal tally to 9 and the club's record to 10 of the last 15 premierships. The 1965 premiership, the last that Williams coached, was played in front of 62,543 people, the largest ever crowd at Adelaide Oval. In that game Port Adelaide defeats Sturt by 3 points. After the 1965 Grand Final, Port Adelaide would be frustrated by the dominance of Sturt, which won 7 premierships over this period under the leadership of Jack Oatey. In all, despite playing in 6 of the next 10 Grand Finals, Port Adelaide would fail to win a premiership until 1977. 1974 Euro 1998, John Cahill, SANFL domination and AFL entry equals. One of Port Adelaide's finest players during the Fos Williams era was John Cahill. He eventually became Williams' copyright and ultimately took over as coach in 1974. In 1975 a dispute between the Port Adelaide City Council and the SANFL over the use of Alberton Oval forced Port Adelaide to move its home matches to Adelaide Oval for 2 seasons. In 1976 Cahill would subsequently take Port Adelaide to its first grand final under his leadership against Sturt with an official attendance of 66,897, the record for football in South Australia. The actual crowd was estimated at 80,000, much bigger than the official figure, as Football Park ran out of tickets early and were forced to shut the gates 90 minutes before the bounce as people were being crushed on entry. Sturt won in an upset by 41 points. In 1977 the dispute regarding Alberton Oval was resolved and the club moved back to its home ground and won that year's premiership, breaking an 11-year drought which at the time was Port Adelaide's longest since competing in an organised football competition. It has taken us a bloody long time, but by G it was worth it. The 1980 season was Port Adelaide's most dominant since 1914. All SANFL divisions of the club made finals, with both the league and reserve sides winning their respective premierships. Russell Ebert won his record 4th Magarey medal. Tim Evans set the then league goal-kicking record of 146 goals in the season. The club provided 7 players to the State League team. The club set a new record for most points scored during the whole season at 3,421, whilst also having the best defence, conceding only 1,851 points. Overall Port Adelaide lost 2 games from 24 for the year. Russell Ebert became coach in 1983 when Cahill left to coach Collingwood for 2 seasons. This period saw the club fail to reach the grand final. The period also marked the rise of the VFL as Australia's premier football competition. Many SANFL players were moving to the VFL larger salaries. In 1982 the SANFL, Norwood and East Perth all approached the VFL in regards to entering the league. All were ignored at the time. Port Adelaide's report from 1982 showed that the failure of these attempts impacted the understanding of its future. From this point onwards the club restructured in regards to economics, public relations and on-field performance for an attempt to enter the league. There was genuine feeling that failure to do this would result in the club ceasing to exist in the future. Talk of a side from South Australia entering the VFL was fast-tracked in 1987 when a team from Western Australia, the West Coast Eagles, and a team from Brisbane, the Brisbane Bears, joined the VFL. South Australia was left out as the only mainland state without a team. John Cahill returned as coach for the 1988 season. During that year, one of Fos Williams' sons, Anthony, was tragically killed in a building accident. The following day the club played against Norwood and managed to overcome an early deficit to win the emotional charged game. The club would go on to win the 1988 Premiership. In 1989 7 out of 10 SANFL clubs were recording losses and the combined income of the SANFL and WAFL had dropped to 40% of that of the VFL. During early 1990 the SANFL decided to wait 3 years before making any further decision in regards to fielding a South Australian side in the VFL until it could be done without negatively affecting football within the state. Frustrated with lack of progress, Port Adelaide were having secret negotiations in the town of Cairns for entry in 1991. From these discussions Port Adelaide Football Club accepted an invitation from the VFL to join what had now become the AFL. The AFL signed a heads-of agreement with the club in expectation that Port would enter the competition in 1991, meaning the Port Adelaide Football Club would field 2 teams, one in the AFL and one in the SANFL. During the 1990 pre-season Port Adelaide played a practice match against the Geelong at Football Park in front of 35,000 spectators with Gary Ablett SNR and Gavin Wanganeen prominent. When knowledge of Port Adelaide's negotiations to gain an AFL licence were made public, many in the SANFL saw it as an act of treachery. SANFL clubs urged Justice Olsen to make an injunction against the bid, which he agreed to. The AFL suggested to the SANFL that if they didn't want Port Adelaide to join the AFL, they could put forward a counter bid to enter a composite South Australian side into the AFL. After legal action from all parties, the AFL finally agreed to accept the SANFL's bid and the Adelaide Football Club was born. These 20 blokes are sensational people, and to our friends in the press, the one thing that really matters is that there will always be a Port Adelaide Football Club. The fallout from the failed bid resulted in some calling for Port Adelaide to be expelled from the SANFL. However, Port Adelaide continued to compete and continued to dominate. When the Adelaide Crows entered the AFL, SANFL attendances dropped by 14%. However, Port Adelaide attendances increased by 13%. Supporters for Port Adelaide's AFL bid included Kevin Sheedy, Tom Hafey, Ron Barassi and David Parkin. In 1994, the AFL announced it would award a second AFL licence to a South Australian club. Present at the 1994 Grand Final was AFL CEO Ross Oakley and Alan Schwab, who bore witness to the club's come-from-behind win against Woodville West Torrens. During December 1994 Max Basher announced that Port Adelaide had won the tender for the second South Australian AFL licence. However, a licence did not guarantee entry, and although a target year of 1996 was set, this was reliant upon an existing AFL club folding or merging with another. In 1996, the cash-strapped Fitzroy announced it would merge with the Brisbane Bears to form the Brisbane Lions. A spot had finally opened, and it was announced that in 1997, 1 year later than expected, Port Adelaide would enter the AFL. Once an entry date had been confirmed, the Port Adelaide Football Club set about forming a side fit for competition in the AFL. It was announced that existing Port Adelaide coach John Cahill would make the transition to the AFL and Stephen Williams would take over the SANFL coaching role. Cahill then set about forming a group which would form the inaugural squad. Brownlow medalist and 1990 Port Adelaide Premiership player, Gavin Wanganeen was poached from Essendon and made captain of a team made up of 6 existing Port Adelaide players, 2 from the Adelaide Crows, 7 players from other SANFL clubs and 14 recruits from interstate. Of the 35 players on Port Adelaide's inaugural AFL list, 13 has played for the club before. The AFL's further Sun rule for the club was set at 200 games for players before 1997. This compared to only 100 for Victorian clubs. On March 29, 1997, Port Adelaide played its first AFL Premiership match against Collingwood at the MCG, suffering a 79-point defeat. Port won its first AFL game in round 3 against Geelong, and defeated crosstown rivals and eventual premiers Adelaide by 11 points in the first showdown in round 4. At the conclusion of round 17, the side sat 5th for only 1 win in percentage off the top spot in what was an unusually close season. but it fell out of the finals after recording only a draw from its final 5 games. Port Adelaide finished its first season 9th, missing the finals on percentage behind Brisbane. The 1998 season was looking very similar to the previous year as they hovered around 9th position for most of the year and looked like a threat for finals after round 14. But they lost 6 of their last 8 games to finish in 10th place, with a record of 9 wins, 12 losses and 1 draw. 1999 Euro 2012, Mark Williams, first AFL Premiership and Primus period equals. In 1999 Mark Williams took over as coach of Port Adelaide. They earned a spot in the AFL finals for the first time. They were eliminated by eventual Premier, North Melbourne, by 44 points in the qualifying final. After finishing 14th in 2000, Port Adelaide had a very successful 2001 season, starting with a maiden pre-season competition victory, defeating the Brisbane Lions. Port Adelaide finished their 2001 home and away season in 3rd place with 16 wins and 6 losses. The club travelled to Brisbane for the qualifying final, losing by 32 points, then lost its home semi-final against 6th-placed Hawthorn to be eliminated. Port Adelaide started 2002 strongly, winning the pre-season competition for the second time in a row, defeating Richmond by 9 points. The side built on its success and won its first AFL minor premiership with an 18-4 record. However, they lost to the eventual premiers, the Brisbane Lions, by 56 points in the preliminary final. Port Adelaide continued its minor round dominance in 2003 and again finished top to claim the minor premiership. However, like the previous year, Port Adelaide was eliminated in the preliminary final, losing to Collingwood by 44 points. Port Adelaide opened the 2004 season well with 4 straight wins, but then won only 4 of its next 8 games. From rounds 12-17, Port Adelaide turned their fortunes around and had 6 consecutive wins, and with 5 rounds remaining were equal top of the ladder with Brisbane, St Kilda and Melbourne. After losing in round 18 to Essendon, Port Adelaide won its remaining 4 games including wins against minor premiership contender Melbourne and crosstown rivals Adelaide to claim the minor premiership for the 3rd consecutive year. Port Adelaide easily won its qualifying final against Geelong, earning a home preliminary final. Port Adelaide made it through to its first AFL Grand Final after defeating St Kilda in a thrilling preliminary final by just 6 points with Gavin Wanganeen kicking the winning goal with a minute to go. The following week Port Adelaide faced a highly fancied Brisbane side attempting to win a record-equalling 4th straight AFL Premiership. Only 1 point separated the sides at half-time, however late in the 3rd quarter Port Adelaide took the ascendancy to lead by 17 points at three-quarter time, and dominated the final term to win by 40 points, 17.11 to 10.13. Byron Pickett was awarded with the Norm Smith Medal after being judged the best player in the match, tallying 20 disposals and kicking 3 goals. Port Adelaide are the winningest team in Australia. The old Port Adelaide have won 36 premierships. Today, at the MCG, may just be their finest hour. After a slow start to the 2005 season, Port finished 8th on the ladder, and defeated the Kangaroos by 87 points in the elimination final. In the semi-final, Port faced minor premiers Adelaide and lost by 83 points. After missing the finals in 2006, Port Adelaide made a strong recovery in 2007, and with strong performances from midfielders Sean Burgoyne and Chad Corns and strong debut seasons from Justin Westhoff, Robert Gray and Travis Boak, Port Adelaide finished the minor round second on the ladder with 15-7 record. Port Adelaide started their finals campaign against the West Coast Eagles at Football Park and won by 3 points. That win gave Port the bye, and they easily defeated the Kangaroos in the preliminary final to win by 87 points. This win delivered Port its 2nd Grand Final berth in 4 years. However, in the Grand Final they were defeated by Geelong by an AFL record margin of 119 points, 24.19 to Port Adelaide's 6.8 in a crowd of 97,302. The 2008 season was disappointing one for a Port Adelaide side keen to build on its 2007 Grand Final appearance, dropping to 13th on the ladder and out of the finals. By 2009, Port Adelaide had accumulated a consolidated debt totaling $5.1 million and was unable to pay its players. They had lost $1.4 million the season before. Financial assistance was denied by the league, with AFL Chief Executive Andrew Demetria saying that they would have to undergo an intensive application process and work with the SANFL, who owned Port Adelaide's AFL licence. On May 20, Port were handed $2.5 million in debt relief by the SANFL, and on June 15 were handed a $1 million grant by the AFL Commission. The SANFL had announced it would not support Port Adelaide in both the AFL and SANFL plans for re-merging the two teams was rejected by the SANFL amidst these off-field struggles. The club finished 10th in 2009. The 2010 season would see Mark Williams step down as senior coach, marking the end of the Williams era for the club. He said he could not imagine an AFL competition without Port Adelaide in it. "I thought that was a really strong statement of leadership." Matthew Primus took over as caretaker coach for Port Adelaide after Mark Williams stood down. The club finished the 2010 season with 5 wins from its last 7 games to finish 10th. On September 9, Matthew Primus was appointed as the senior coach of the club for the next 3 years. The SANFL sought to take control of Port Adelaide in 2011. Despite underwriting $5 million of Port's debt in 2010, the takeover failed when the SANFL was unable to get a line of credit to cover Port Adelaide's future debts. The AFL announced it would underwrite $1.25 million in debt to protect its $1.25 billion television rights. AFL Chief Executive Andrew Demetria offered $9 million over the next 3 years to help the club, ahead of the move to the Adelaide Oval. The AFL gave the money to the SANFL with strict conditions that they give Port Adelaide $3 million a year, for 3 years. Statistically, 2011 was Port Adelaide's worst season in 141 years, finishing 16th with only 3 wins from 22 games. Rounds 20 and 21 saw the club lose to Collingwood and Hawthorn by record margins of 138 and 165 respectively. The 2012 season was marginally better, but a loss against Greater Western Sydney resulted in senior coach Matthew Primus stepping down. Assistant coach, Gary Hocking, took over for the remaining 4 games, with a draw in the final round against Richmond the best result. 2013 present, Ken Hinkley, Adelaide Oval return and independence . On October 8, 2012, Ken Hinkley was announced as the new senior coach of the club. This marked the first time that the club had appointed someone not associated with the club before since Vose Williams in 1950. Television personality David Koch was named chairman of the club and numerous board members were replaced. The 2013 pre-season also saw Travis Boak succeed Domenic Cassisi as the captain of the club. The club finished the home and away season 7th on the ladder, making it the first time that they had qualified for the finals since 2007. Port travelled to Melbourne to play Collingwood at the MCG in an elimination final where they won by 24 points. They then lost to Geelong by 16 points the following week. The 2014 season saw both Port Adelaide and Adelaide move their home ground from Football Park to the redeveloped Adelaide Oval. Port Adelaide signed up a record 55,715 members for the 2014 season, and averaged 44,429 at home games, a 65% increase from the previous year. Port Adelaide had its best first half of an AFL season, sitting first with 10 wins from 11 matches. They then won only 4 of their remaining 11 matches to finish 5th on the ladder. They hosted Richmond in the elimination final, kicking the first 7 goals of the game and leading by as much as 87 points before recording a 57-point victory. After defeating Fremantle in the semi-final, the club's 2014 season ended with a 3-point loss to Hawthorn in the preliminary final. With great expectation, Port Adelaide started the 2015 season playing all of the year's finalists in the opening 10 rounds and entered the mid-season break with a 5-7 record. The club had a better second half of the year, recording 7-3, but would miss out on finals by 1 win. SANFL presence post-AFL entry. When the Port Adelaide Football Club entered the AFL, a new state league team was created to fill the void left by the club. The new club was now called the Port Adelaide Magpies Football Club as opposed to the original counterpart, the Port Adelaide Football Club, playing in the national competition. On August 20, 2010, the One Port Adelaide Football Club movement was launched by former player Tim Ginniver to merge the Port Adelaide Football Club and the Port Adelaide Magpies Football Club as one club. A website was created that claimed 50,000 signatures were needed for the two entities to merge. On November 15, 2010, all 9 SANFL clubs agreed that the off-field merger between the two clubs would proceed. On September 10, 2013, Port Adelaide and the SANFL agreed to a model to allow all its AFL-listed players to play for the club in the SANFL League competition. From 2015 onward, the club lost its recruiting zones and could no longer field sides in the junior SANFL competition. Port Adelaide subsequently started an academy team composed of 18 to 22-year-olds. Club symbols and identity. Guernsey The Port Adelaide Football Club won 32 grand finals in the Wharf Pylon Guernsey in addition to the champions of Australia 3 times. Due to the fact that AFL club Collingwood were already using the Magpie emblem and Magpies nickname, Port Adelaide was requested by the AFL to simply find a new nickname and logo to avoid a clash. However, after the unsuccessful 1990 bid, Collingwood successfully lobbied the AFL to force Port Adelaide to change not only its logo and nickname but also its Guernsey and colours. In 1995, a new Guernsey was created incorporating teal. In May 2007, Chief Executive John James stated that Port Adelaide received more correspondence from its supporters about the heritage Guernsey than all other issues and that the club would fight for its heritage and what is right. Port Adelaide decided not to participate in the 2006 Heritage Round when the AFL declined the club's 1980s Guernsey for its 80s-themed Heritage Round. In 2007 the club was waiting for confirmation from the AFL that it could wear its 1970s Wharf Pylon Guernsey for a match against the Western Bulldogs and wanted confirmation it would be able to continue to honour its heritage in any future Heritage Rounds. On May 14, 2007 the AFL and Port Adelaide reached an agreement whereby the club could wear its traditional Guernsey in the Heritage Round, with the proviso that in future seasons its players can only wear it in home Heritage Round games and provided that such a game is not against Collingwood. No Heritage Rounds have been held since this agreement was reached. This team from South Australia This Port Power why would they pick black and white? Did the competition really need another club in navy or dark colours? Collingwood club president Eddie Maguire has been a vocal opponent of Port Adelaide wearing the Wharf Pylon Guernsey, claiming that Collingwood has an exclusive right to wear black and white in the AFL, even in the Heritage Round. It should have nothing to do with Eddie Maguire and Collingwood. I'll say that for a start. Support for the Guernsey remains extremely high with a limited batch of jumpers raising over $400,000 for the club for the one-off game against Carlton in 2013. The most recent instance of the club trying to wear its traditional Guernsey was in celebration of 100 years since its 1914 Championship of Australia. The AFL denied the club the right. There was controversy in 2014 during the lead-up to the final against Richmond when the AFL told Port Adelaide they had to wear their clash Guernsey. On September 2, 2014 the AFL cleared them to use the traditional Guernsey for the match. I've always regarded that strip that Port are wearing today as the best uniform in Australian football. Home and away Guernsey, worn in 2009 as the winning design from a competition, it became permanent in 2010. Clash Guernsey, adopted in 2010. Traditional Guernsey, the Wharf Pylon Guernsey was adopted in 1902 and is worn in the AFL when permitted. Club songs Before the bounce at Port Adelaide's home games supporters hold up their scarves and sing to Australian band INXS's song Never Tear Us Apart. It is a reference to the various and unique difficulties the club faced when trying to enter the AFL. The idea to use the song stemmed from a trip the Port Adelaide players and staff took to Anfield in November 2012 while the club was in England to play an exhibition match against the Western Bulldogs. The AFL side's victory song is Power to Win, written for the club by Quentin Ayres and Les Catchmark. The SANFL side's victory song is Cheer, Cheer the Black and the White, to the tune of Notre Dame Victory March. Never Tear Us Apart. Since March 2014, Port Adelaide has used Australian band Inc.'s Never Tear Us Apart as the club's unofficial anthem leading up to the opening bounce at its new home of Adelaide Oval. The song is used as a reference to the various and unique difficulties the club faced when trying to enter the AFL. Port Adelaide's use of the song stemmed from a trip the club took to Anfield in November 2012 while they were in England to play an exhibition match against the Western Bulldogs. In light of the very positive reviews given by the club's players towards the Anfield crowd's rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone, Matthew Richardson, Port's general manager of marketing and consumer business, along with the club's management, sought to replicate the pre-match experience they experienced at Anfield. At a meeting in mid-2013, the idea of an anthem was raised. A number of various songs were suggested, including Power and the Passion by Midnight Oil and Power to the People by John Schumann. Eventually, Never Tear Us Apart by INXS was suggested by Port Adelaide's events manager, Tara McLeod. It was eventually accepted, due to the fact that the song resonated with the club's history. Initially the song was introduced to coincide with the 60-second countdown before the start of a match, with the music playing over the top of a video montage. The song proved to be a success among the fans, with them adopting the song as well as raising scarves above their heads as the song was being sung. So successful was the song that by June 2014, the club were forced to print club-coloured scarves with the words Never Tear Us Apart on them that fans would hold aloft and sing in unison prior to the start of matches. Home grounds on May 15, 1880, Port Adelaide played its first match at Alberton Oval. In 1881 the decision was made by the club to start leasing the Oval from the Port Adelaide Council for the sum of 10 shillings a year. Situated at the eastern end of the suburb of Alberton in Adelaide, the playing surface is surrounded by the Alan Scott Club headquarters, the Robert B. Quinham Stand, the Fos Williams Family Stand, the Port Adelaide Bowling Club and the N.L. Williams scoreboard. As well as the facilities facing the Oval, along Queen Street there is the Port Club and the Port Store. Current playing list Note: Port Adelaide AFL listed players are allowed to play for the SANFL squad. Corporate Administrative positions Chairman, David Koch, Chief Executive, Keith Thomas, Football Operations, Chris Davis, Board Members, Kevin Osborne, Cas Cardoni, Ross Islam, George Fiacchi, Jamie Resters, Richard Ryan, Trevor Thiel, Amanda Vanstone. Current sponsors Major sponsor, Renault, Energy Australia, Food Bank. Clothing, International Sports Clothing. Membership and attendance as of 232,015. Supporters. Supporter groups Port Adelaide has many supporter groups, with every state or territory containing at least one supporter group. In addition, many country towns within South Australia have their own supporter group, many of which travel to both home and away games. Port Adelaide Cheer Squad, Outer Army, Alberton Crowd, Interstate Groups. Number 1 ticket holders Current, Hugh Sheridan, a Euro-Australian actor. Former, David Koch, a Euro 7 Network's Sunrise co-host. Current club president, Stuart O'Grady, a Euro-Australian professional road bicycle racer. Teresa Palmer, a Euro-Australian model and actress. Bob Quinn, a Euro former Port Adelaide player. Tony Samtic, a Euro owner of Maccabi Diva. Notable followers, Andre Agassi, a Euro-American professional tennis player, Sir Donald Bradman, a Euro-Australian cricketer. Darren Cahill, a Euro-Australian professional tennis player, coach and son of John Cahill. Dean Cantor, a Euro-Australian professional touring car driver. Thanasi Kokinak is a Euro-Australian professional tennis player. Anna Mears, a Euro-Australian gold medal track cyclist. Jason Momoa, a Euro-American Hawaiian actor and writer. Erin Phillips, a Euro-Australian professional basketball player. Roger Rashid, a Euro-Australian professional tennis player, coach. Daniel Smith, a Euro member of Australian hip-hop group The Hilltop Hoods. Michael Turter, Australian gold medal track cyclist. Club honour boards. Honour roll Hall of Fame Greatest team military service a Euro denotes killed in action or died while serving. Club achievements. Player achievements. Competition awards Magarey Medal, 1899 a Euro Stan Malin, 1907 a Euro Jack Mack, 1910 a Euro Samson Hosking, 1914 a Euro Jack Ashley, 1915 a Euro Samson Hosking, 1921 a Euro Charlie Adams, 1925 a Euro Peter Bampton, 1938 a Euro Bob Quinn, 1945 a Euro Bob Quinn, 1956 a Euro Dave Boyd, 1964 a Euro Jeva Motley, 1967 a Euro Trevor Obst, 1971 a Euro Russell Abert, 1974 a Euro Russell Abert, 1975 a Euro Peter Voigt, 1976 a Euro Russell Abert, 1980 a Euro Russell Abert, 1986 a Euro Greg Anderson, 1990 a Euro Scott Hodges, 1992 a Euro Nathan Buckley, 2001 a Euro Tony Brown and Ryan O'Connor, 2003 a Euro Brett Abert, 2005 a Euro Jeremy Clayton, AFL-CA Champion Player of the Year, 2004 a Euro Warren Tredrea, 2014 a Euro Robbie Gray, AFL Rising Star, 1997 a Euro Michael Wilson, 2006 a Euro Daniel Pearce. Grand Final Best on Ground Awards Norm Smith Medal, 2004 a Euro Byron Pickett, Jack Oatey Medal, 1981 a Euro Russell Abert, 1988 a Euro Bruce Abernethy, 1989 a Euro Russell Johnston, 1990 a Euro George Fiacchi, 1992 a Euro Nathan Buckley, 1994 a Euro Darryl Wakelin, 1995 a Euro Anthony Darcy, 1996 a Euro David Brown, 1998 a Euro Brett Chalmers, 1999 a Euro Darryl Poole. All Australian Sporting Life magazine, 1947 a Euro Bob Quinn, 1950 a Euro Dick Russell, Fose Williams, 1951 a Euro Harold MacDonald, Fose Williams, 1955 a Euro Harold MacDonald, Interstate Carnivals, 1956 a Euro John Abley, 1958 a Euro John Abley, 1961 a Euro John Abley, 1969 a Euro John Cahill, 1980 a Euro Greg Phillips, Mark Williams, 1983 a Euro Craig Bradley, Tony Giles, Stephen Curtis, 1985 a Euro Craig Bradley, 1987 a Euro Greg Anderson, 1988 a Euro Martin Leslie, Australian Football League, 1997 a Euro Adam Hughes, 2001 a Euro Gavin Wanganeen, Matthew Primus, Warren Tredrea, 2002 a Euro Brett Montgomery, Matthew Primus, Warren Tredrea, Josh Franker, 2003 a Euro Gavin Wanganeen, Warren Tredrea, 2004 a Euro Warren Tredrea, Chad Corns, Mark Williams, 2005 a Euro Kane Corns, 2006 a Euro Brendan Lade, Sean Burgoyne, 2007 a Euro Kane Corns, Chad Corns, Brendan Lade, 2013 a Euro Chad Wingard, Travis Boak, 2014 a Euro Robbie Gray, Travis Boak, 2015 a Euro Chad Wingard, Robbie Gray. Club awards John Cahill Medal. Gavin Wanganeen Medal, 2006 a Euro Daniel Pearce, 2007 a Euro Justin Westhoff, 2008 a Euro Alapate Khalil, 2009 a Euro Travis Boak, 2010 a Euro Jackson Chngov, 2011 a Euro Hamish Hartlett, 2012 a Euro Chad Wingard, 2013 a Euro Ollie Wines, 2014 a Euro Ollie Wines, John McCarthy Medal, 2013 a Euro Jack Hombsch, 2014 a Euro Brad Abert. Club records, overall win-loss record, AFL a Euro 440 games/224 wins/211 losses/5 draws, SANFL a Euro 2636 games/1727 wins/860 losses/65 draws, at end of 2015 season. Best league record against another club, over 10 league matches against a current club. AFL Euro West Coast Euro 17 wins/10 losses/0 draws. SANFL Euro Glenelg Euro 177 wins/67 losses/3 draws, at end of 2015 season. Worst league record against another club, over 10 league matches against a current club. AFL Euro Sydney Euro 7 wins/19 losses/0 draws. SANFL Euro Norwood Euro 195 wins/190 losses/17 draws, as of 212,015, highest score, AFL Euro 29.14 vs Hawthorn, round 13, 2005, Football Park, SANFL Euro 37.21 vs Woodville, April 19, 1980, Football Park, lowest score, AFL Euro 3.3 vs Collingwood, round 20, 2011, Football Park, SANFL Euro 1.1 vs North Adelaide. May 5, 1900, Alberton Oval, greatest winning margin, AFL Euro 117 points vs Hawthorn, round 13, 2005, Football Park, SANFL Euro 179 points vs Woodville, August 8, 1970, Woodville Oval, greatest losing margin, AFL Euro 165 points vs Hawthorn, round 21, 2011, MCG, SANFL Euro 114 points vs Sturt, 1965, Unley Oval, most wins in a season, AFL Euro 20 wins, SANFL Euro 21 wins, least losses in a season, AFL Euro 5 losses. SANFL Euro 0 losses, largest home attendances, AFL Euro 54,468 at Adelaide Oval, AFL Euro 52,505 at Adelaide Oval, SANFL Euro 36,397 at Football Park, SANFL Euro 22,738 at Alberton Oval, largest away attendances, AFL Euro 51,883 at MCG, SANFL Euro 30,618 at Adelaide Oval, SANFL Euro 22,015 at Unley Oval, largest finals attendances, AFLA Euro 97,302 at MCG, SANFL Euro 66,897 at Football Park, longest undefeated run, AFL Euro 8 wins, SANFL Euro 33 games, longest losing run, AFL Euro 11 games, SANFL Euro 7 games. Player records, most games played, AFL Euro 300 Euro Kane Corns, SANFL Euro 392 Euro Russell Ebert, most games coached, AFL Euro 274 Euro Mark Williams, SANFL Euro 444 Euro Foes Williams, combined Euro 465 Euro John Cahill, most premierships as player, SANFL Euro 9 Euro Jether Motley, AFL Euro 1 Euro 2004 Premiership team, most premierships as coach, SANFL Euro 10 Euro John Cahill, AFL Euro 1 Euro Mark Williams, most goals at Port Adelaide, AFL Euro 549 Euro Warren Tredrea, SANFL Euro 1044 Euro Tim Evans, most goals in a match, AFL Euro 8 Euro Warren Tredrea, AFL Euro 8 Euro Jay Schultz, SANFL Euro 16 Euro Tim Evans, most goals in a season, AFL Euro 81 Euro Warren Tredrea, SANFL Euro 153 Euro Scott Hodges. References. External links, official AFL website of the Port Adelaide Football Club.